amenities for over 200,000 people. The most important was running water. The city's source was 8 miles away in the Marnus Valley. Diverting it into Ephesus required an extraordinary feat of engineering.
Well, here we have it. This is the aqueduct bridge for Rome and Ephesus. This was built something like 2,000 years ago, before the time of St. Paul's visit here, but it's still in incredibly good condition.
An aqueduct this size needed funding beyond what the city could pay for, but it gave politicians a chance to gain favor with the masses.
It gives us the name of the man, Gaius Sextilius Pollio, with his wife and also their son, for the people of Ephesus. Sua pecunia facundum curavit. We pay for this from our own pockets. It's a way of making certain the people of Ephesus remember who you are. Or perhaps more to the point, when election time comes round again, remember my stepson.
Whatever their motive, the private individuals who paid for projects like this did a great service for the city. Pollio's aqueduct carried vital water supplies into Ephesus, where they entered an elaborate cistern.
This is precisely the sort of thing we're looking for when following an aqueduct. And they're absolutely jam-packed with calcium carbonate. It's calcium that's been dissolved out of the water, coming down with the aqueduct through these limestone hills, come into the city somewhere in this area, onto this structure. And over here, a section which has been broken loose. If I can lift this, and you have the flange at the one end, the socket at the other end. The flange would always be on the downstream side. So, a very good example of Roman technology.
Pipes like these ran in a network down the hill. There were 100 gallons a day for each Ephesian, comparable to the provision made in most modern cities. Paul and most other citizens got their water from communal fountains, but some buildings were supplied directly. One was the bathhouse. The Roman baths were the focal point of the city's social life. Here the Ephesians discussed politics, philosophy, and Paul's religious ideas. Christianity spread by word of mouth, and it was from places like this that Paul's message began to pass to a wider audience. The bathhouses were places equipped with what was then high technology, including an underfloor heating system called a hypocaust.
And we are, in fact, very lucky at this particular point. This is a very good preserved cross-section of a typical hypocaust system. So you can see the pillars here which support the main floor, a very thick, very hard pink Roman plaster known as opus signinum. It retains heat. On top of this, we're very lucky, marble slabs from the floor.
Hot air flooded the underfloor space, spreading up the walls to heat the room from all sides. Hot water was piped into the bath. The dirty water from the bathhouse was put to good use. It flushed out waste from other buildings. And just next door is one of the most important facilities found in any large Roman city.
And sure enough, a really nice Roman public latrine. Marble seats, nice and cool in the summer, not so nice perhaps in the winter. And you'd sit here next to your neighbour, talk about the weather, gladiatorial games, what life was like. You have a nice little water trough in front because the Romans did not have toilet paper. Instead, every Roman carried a personal sponge, and they would have the sponge on the end of a stick, dip it in the end of the water, and now you see what this is for.
Our evidence for this comes from an unusual source.
We are told that one gladiator, rather than go out and fight his opponent, decided to commit suicide. And he did so by making the excuse of going to the latrine and grabbing hold of a sponge and choking himself to death with this. So that's how we know about the sponges.
While Paul would have used these public restrooms, the upper classes had the privacy of their luxury homes. Today, the remains of these lavish houses are protected in a climate-controlled shelter. St. Paul would have seen them being built and furnished in exotic marble brought from across the Roman Empire to advertise their owner's wealth. Each house had a private bathroom, constantly flushed by the continuous flow of the aqueduct system.
This is a very high quality latrine, small private latrine. We know in Rome at least, we assume in Ephesus as well, they had different sized water pipes and they calculated the tax you paid by the size of your water pipe. So to have a private toilet like this is very much a sign of status.
The wealthiest households could even afford an early form of air conditioning, walls of water.
You need water every day just to stay alive. You need water for washing, for cooking, but it helps to cool down the air as well. So all in all, this must have been an extremely pleasant place to be in, especially in the middle of the summer.
The Ephesian ruling classes enjoyed high quality of life, and suddenly Paul threatened to disrupt that. Not only did he undermine their pagan beliefs, but with it, he damaged the city's most important trade. Religion was big business in this Ephesus. Its market fed off pilgrims to the temple. Silver statuettes of the goddess Artemis sold as charms brought in vast revenue. But the arrival of Christianity meant that people were turning their backs on Ephesus. 25,000 people gathered in the Great Theater to hear a silversmith called Demetrius speak. He told them that Paul was not only insulting their goddess, but also threatening their main source of income. He stirred the crowd to the point where an anti-Christian riot erupted. Tradition has it that to appease the angry mob, Paul was thrown into prison. It's thought that was where he would write some of the letters that would make up so much of the New Testament. On his release, he was told to leave Ephesus. But his new religion had already taken hold. The city was becoming a city of Christians. And the silversmith Demetrius was right. The city of Ephesus declined with the cult of Artemis. It was the beginning of a long, slow collapse that will see the temple fall into ruin. Paul moved on. His message would have an equally powerful effect elsewhere. It would reach to the very furthest parts of the Roman Empire, transforming every community it touched. Next, we investigate the religious society that sprung up in the wake of St. Paul. In the strange land of Cappadocia, a mysterious group of Christians would seek safety by building a secret world underground. 15 million years ago, a series of volcanic eruptions around the Mediterranean threw up immense clouds of ash, blanketing the land layer upon layer. Over time, this created a bizarre, otherworldly place. Today, it's called Cappadocia. Some scholars believe that St. Paul came here to preach his new religion. Our investigators are trying to understand the part that this alien landscape played in the birth of Christianity. And the best way to see what traces remain is from above. It stretches over 15,000 square miles. It's dotted with sculpted cones, pyramids, and obelisks. The ash is up to 300 feet thick. Each layer is of a different consistency, and this means that erosion by wind and rain has created a remarkable, uneven terrain. Early explorers thought the shapes must have been carved by some ancient race. The buildings do show the skill and craftsmanship of a highly sophisticated people. Their works can still be seen, and it still impresses.
We see some steps there cutting into the rock, leading up to somebody's habitation. It's an incredibly gorgeous place, beautiful.
The word Cappadocia derives from the Persian for land of beautiful horses. The Cappadocians were famed as suppliers of prize animals for the Roman army. Down on the ground, Veronica Callas chooses the best form of local transport and heads for the Ilara Valley, a canyon cut deep into the ash. She finds an extraordinary concentration of ancient churches carved into the rock face. There are over 100 of them in this 10-mile valley alone. It's clear that Paul's message had an immense impact. The churches are decorated with frescoes that depict stories from the New Testament. Veronica wants to trace Paul's story back further. She heads for a settlement a few miles north of the canyon to try to discover how early Cappadocians lived. What Paul would have come across was an extraordinary community of cave dwellers. This settlement has long since been abandoned, but its ancient inhabitants left behind tantalizing glimpses of their lives.
It's a large square room, and it has a conical vault that leads up into a ventilation shaft.
There's a chimney. They lit fires here.
This is most likely where they cooked. This is an oven with fire burning down below and perhaps a grill.
To the trained eye, another room reveals evidence of industry.
This is known as a pit loom, and this is a fine example where you might have a wooden frame erected around the sitter's lap in order to weave textiles.
There are also pits for storing clay jugs or amphoras. Using these clues, sculpted 2,000 years ago from ash, Veronica is building up a picture of what the Cappadocians were like.
The people who lived here were said to be very rugged, the cowboys of the empire. And there's a story that when a viper would bite a Cappadocian, the viper would die. This is how tough the Cappadocians were.
And yet, living on the trade route between Europe and Asia, these people were becoming rich. The Cappadocians' lifestyle was sophisticated and comfortable. A large ceremonial hall indicates the high status of the people living here. Most of the ancient world's freestanding buildings have long since crumbled away. But Cappadocia's volcanic ash retains a record of its architecture. It offers a unique glimpse of the lost world in which St. Paul operated, and there is clear evidence that his religion gained a foothold here.
This is a really nice church. It's in a basilica style with columns and piers and arcades separating this very large barrel-vaulted nave from side aisles, and here we're entering into the sanctuary where the altar should be.
Although these columns appear to have been built from bricks and mortar, they are actually cut from the volcanic ash. Their elaborate style simply mimics the building techniques of the time. Ash is easily worked with simple tools, but hollowing out a sophisticated home like this would have taken many months and a great deal of skill and planning. Veronica has analyzed each of the 15 rooms here, and now, using computer graphics, we can reveal the complex structure of this settlement. This residence is the largest and most elaborate in Cappadocia, covering 3,000 square yards, about half the size of a football field. The kitchen, ceremonial halls, and church mark it out as an estate for the elite. It was home to a large, aristocratic, and publicly Christian family. This place is part of St. Paul's legacy. The architectural details of the Church of Dermish Kadir have been remarkably well preserved. They give us a rare insight into how early Christians worshipped.
This is a nice representation of the kind of church that emerged immediately after St. Paul's times. There are no paintings here, and yet the architecture is very, very elegant. You can imagine what an amazing place this would have been around the 4th to the 6th century. This is known as an ambo. that is a pulpit. This is a very important feature in early Christian churches. So this is the closest thing we have to the time of St. Paul. They mostly stood then. It seems that people prayed with their hands open and their chest up to the sky, not bowing down and closed.
The congregation stood around the ambo in the nave, facing the altar in the central apse. To left and right were side aisles containing a baptismal font. Behind them was the church entrance, the narthex. Today it is lined with empty tombs. But it was not always easy for the Cappadocians to hold on to their Christian faith. The more the early church grew, the more Rome saw it as a threat. So it went literally underground. Next, we reveal the extraordinary subterranean world created by the Cappadocians to provide shelter and safety for tens of thousands of people. For 30 years, Paul traveled the Roman world, spreading the message of Christianity. His journey entered its final phase in Jerusalem. Around 60 AD, he was arrested for a breach of Jewish law. He faced death, but exercised his right as a Roman citizen to go to trial in Rome itself. This was a dangerous gamble. The Roman Emperor Nero saw Christians as a threat.
By the mid-60s, the situation of the Christians in Rome was quite precarious. The Romans recognized that they were not a sect of Judaism, but were a separate religion.
And when fire engulfed the city, destroying hundreds of buildings, Nero needed someone to blame.
After the fire in Rome in 64, Nero was looking for a convenient scapegoat, and he pointed to the Christians as the cause of the fire, and this brought great persecution.
Paul was well known as a Christian leader. Tradition says that Nero singled him out. He had him beheaded. But he couldn't kill Paul's message. In the lands where he had preached, the Christian faith had taken root, and slowly, over centuries, Christianity came to rule the Roman Empire. In 313 AD, the Roman Emperor Constantine became a Christian. The pagan gods were swept aside, their temples destroyed, replaced with the first Christian churches. And yet that golden age is short-lived. It meant the fate of the empire and the church became linked. Christianity grew while Rome remained strong, and when Rome declined, her enemies became the church's enemies. This shift in fortunes was felt even by the remote cave-dwelling Christians of Cappadocia. By the 5th century AD, as Rome fell, they found themselves at the mercy of Arab warlords. They had no means to fight back. They took an incredible course of action. In their tens of thousands, Cappadocia's Christians went underground. It wasn't until the 1960s that this extraordinary story was revealed. The chance find of a secret passageway led to a series of bizarre discoveries. Beneath this landscape are hundreds of miles of man-made tunnels. Their entrances are incredibly well hidden. But opening these cunningly concealed doorways gives us a new insight into the story of the first Christians. Investigations have revealed that the tunnels formed self-contained settlements, with all the features of a sophisticated society. People survived down here thanks to ingenious ventilation shafts carved into the rock.
It's quite amazing. If you stand here, you feel a breeze, and we are several meters underneath ground level. In fact, they reach the water table. So these function both as ventilation shafts and as wells to pump water from down below. We have a large square, what looks like a room, but in fact, it's a bin for grapes, and the grapes would be pressed. And so wine, the liquid from pressing, would come through here and then be deposited in this rock-cut space here.
Life underground cannot have been easy. It's hard to imagine how these people survived without seeing the sun.
They didn't have a sense of day and night down there, and I think that must have created some very strange psychology in people.
They were clearly desperate. They secured the entrances to these complexes with heavy wheel-like doors. Some remain sealed to this day. And 2 stories down, there's hard proof of what drove them here.
This is what looks like an altar. We don't really know why this is here in the middle. The altar usually is in the apse. 2 apses side by side. That's how we know that it's a church.
They'd been forced underground because of their faith. It was natural that they would build altars to worship. 40 settlements like this have been discovered. The largest is 8 stories deep, sinking 90 yards underground with 20 miles of tunnels. It's believed that up to 20,000 people could hide in this one complex alone. And it's believed that there are many more such networks still to be found. It would be another 5 centuries before peace returned to this region. For 300 years, Christians used these tunnels and endured enormous hardship to preserve their faith. That faith was St. Paul's legacy.
Paul's role in early Christianity has been said by some to be really the founder of Christianity, but really the message he proclaimed was that of Jesus himself. He wrote half of the New Testament. 13 books are attributed to Paul. He established churches all the way from Antioch to Rome, and these became the foundation for later Christianity.
St. Paul spent a lifetime traveling through the cities of the ancient world. He challenged the might of the Roman Empire. When he began, Christianity was a faith in danger of extinction. But through the efforts of this one man, it not only survived but flourished to become one of the world's major religions.